company this.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum, and welcome to the Iftar Drive right here on Salam Media. My name is Luqman Skink. It is the 18th of Ramadan, and of course, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for yet again letting us see yet another beautiful day. And of course, another month, another day in the month, in the beautiful month of the month of Ramadan. And of course, many of us are, looking forward to the itikaf, which begins this week sometime, or at least by the weekend in South Africa. Don't you think that when the zakat, when the people start sitting in the itikaf in the masjid, then it kind of feels that Ramadan is on its swan song, and it kind of feels that Ramadan has really moved quite fast, hasn't it? But the month of Ramadan, of course, lots of important acts of ibadah that Muslim people get involved in. The least of which is, of course, the fasting, which is the most important. And then there's the the Taraweeh at night, and there's also the payment of Zakat. Now, the payment of Zakat is one of the 5 pillars of Islam and an essential tenet of Iman. Now, to understand how important it is, we just have to look at the history of Islam when the first successor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Khalif, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he waged war with those tribes who refused to pay over their zakat to him after the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And on the Iftar Drive today, inshallah, we'll be focusing on zakah with a very special guest. And my guest this afternoon is Mukadam, Showkat Mukadam, rather. He is a trustee for the SANZAF, which is the South African National Zakat Fund, for the last 40 years, and also its second deputy president. He joins deputy chairperson, rather. He joins me right now on the StreamYard link. Assalamu alaikum, Showkat, and welcome to the Iftar Drive. Okay, Showkat, are you there? All right, we're just going to make sure that we get that line back. We want to talk to Showkat about our big focus, and that is zakat. And of course, alhamdulillah, as we mentioned, one of the pillars of Islam, and the fact that it is something that Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the first Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made sure that those tribes that were refusing to pay the zakat to him as the Khalifa, or the immediate first successor of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he was going to go and wage war. In fact, it's the first kind of practical business that Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu took care of when he assumed the Khilafat and the leadership of the Muslimin. That was his first task as Amirul Mu'minin. And you wonder why did he do that? He did that because it is such an important aspect of our deen that if anybody refuses to pay the zakah, they are effectively negating Islam. And of course, those people were fought against by Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But the context of zakat in today's day and age is something that we're going to be talking about, the concept and principles of zakat. From the history that I just mentioned in Islam to the importance of zakat in today's day and age. And as I said earlier, my guest is Mukaddam, and he joins me on the line right now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and assalamu alaikum to your viewers also. I'm sorry about that. We just had a load shedding switch over, so I've switched over to my hotspot on my phone. So inshallah, I'm watching the battery time, but we'll see how we progress, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. I was telling Showkat, the viewers, that we our big focus today is on zakat, and of course, who better to bring other than yourself? 40 years in this space, of course, something you've become something of an expert when it comes to zakat, and alhamdulillah, I'm very excited that we're going to be speaking to you. Now, the concept of zakat in today's day and age, why is it important, and what are the principles of zakat? Something that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sahaba radiallahu anhum established in the deen, but 1,400 years ago, we still, talking about its importance.
Well, Brother Luqman, I think you, in your introduction, referred to it as an act of ibadah, and so rightly it is so. And being in the month of Ramadan, as you know, our rewards are multiplied manifold, really, from that point of view. More importantly, I think it is also the ability to connect with the recipients, particularly, really. So putting all that together, I think in the month of Ramadan, it's good time to take stock of how you've calculated your zakah and the principles of zakah. We believe that, with the role of zakah and the zakah contributions can make, it can lift many people out of the poverty streak that we're encountering at the moment, really, from that point of view. So inshallah, we will cover the principles of zakah and then particularly focus on the business assets, really. I think it's very easy to calculate zakah when you've got money in the bank with an individual. But we find in our experience that a lot of areas that's neglected is the calculation of zakah by business people, really. So inshallah, I hope to give some insight into that, and hope to take some questions offline if it has to be, really. So there are four basic principles, core principles before anybody is liable to pay zakah in any situation. And the first one is that you must have the minimum wealth before you're liable to pay zakah. And if you look at it in the context, we call this the term of nisab. And in the current environment, the value of translated for minimum amount of wealth that you must have a surplus wealth is about 8,500 rand. Namely, it's based on 87 grams of gold, or alternatively 612 grams of silver, and we use within our context the conversion of the value of the silver, and we get the nisab value based on this every day. So the first point really is that you need to meet the requirements of nisab, minimum amount of wealth. The second point is that any asset, surplus asset that which you're going to pay on, you must have total ownership of it. In other words, you must be able to freely dispose of the surplus wealth. Or I'll put another way, if your assets are tied up with a bank or a bond or so on, you're not liable to pay zakah on those assets, surplus assets, really. Thirdly, the surplus wealth must be with you for a year cycle, 1 year cycle, really. That's the third requirement. And the fourth requirement, which is very important, is that the kind of asset you pay zakah on, and again, it's surplus wealth, must lend itself to growth or to exchange, all right? So hence, you do not pay zakah on private assets. Very simply put, you don't pay zakah on your house, your furniture, and so on, nor do you pay zakah on the capital assets in your business. As we're focusing on business, I want to emphasize that. We often get questions, I have a rental property, do I pay on the property? No, you don't pay on the property. You don't pay on the plant and machinery. You don't pay on the vans and refrigeration plant and whatever the case is. So those four principles are the key that drives how you calculate zakah on excess wealth. So excess wealth is anything above nisab, really. So when it comes to business assets, particularly, we say that because you don't have to pay on the capital assets, in other words, the assets that give rise to the core of the operation, you pay on what we call the liquid assets. And it's very simple. It's not complicated. And those assets are what we call near liquid assets, which can easily be converted to money. So typically in a business, it will be your stock, because stock is easily convertible to money, really. If you look at your debtors, it's your accounts receivable. It can easily be converted to money the next day. And you also take the money in the bank in your business. Those are the three key items in the business. From those items, once you've added that up, you deduct your immediate debts, your immediate liabilities. So what kind of liability would those be? Something like VAT, value-added tax, your suppliers, amount you owe for taxes, and so on. Those are the immediate debts payable. So once you get the net figure of that, you calculate, as recommended by the Prophet ﷺ, 2.5% on that figure. 2.5%. You ignore all your other capital assets. You ignore all your other debt of a long-term nature. You may have a bond in your business. You may have a long-term loan in a business. And that's the basis. But I think for me, the key aspect is to be consistent for business people. In other words, You've got to choose an Islamic date, which is the same date every year, first of Ramadan or whatever the case is. You've got to choose a particular date. You have to be consistent. The second point is that you have to have a basis of how you're calculating the stock value and the basis of how you're calculating your debtors, your amounts owing to you. So in the case of stock, it's highly recommended that you value the stock as if you sold the whole business, all the stock in one go. I put it very simply, at least at cost. But you can't go from cost to market value, from market value to cost, or cost less a obsolescence factor. Please be consistent on your policy of how you value it. So you've chosen the date, you've chosen the valuation of your stock. When it comes to accounts receivable or debtors, for example, be consistent. You are required to pay zakah on good or strong debtors. In other words, if somebody is struggling to pay his account to you, then decide to ignore him, but have a criteria. So I say to people that come for advice, just decide that all those who owe you for more than 90 days, hypothetically, you're going to leave out. But be consistent every year. You can't go from 90 days to 60 days the following year, for example. Are you with me? So I think the importance of consistency is important, and it comes through. And you've got to decide on this criteria. But ultimately, like we do a calculation for tax, we record it and we calculate it and so on, you've got to develop a methodology of recording your calculation, okay, and filing it. Because ultimately, this is an act of ibadah. You must take it as seriously and more seriously than working out your taxes, really, because this is a process of cleansing your wealth effectively. This is a role that plays an important role in the Islamic economy. The beneficiaries takes the money and goes and spends it at business houses, Muslim business houses, and the cycle gets completed effectively. And the business houses, again, in turn on the profit, pay the zakat contribution. So it's important that, one, we realize that we're talking about surplus wealth calculated in these different categories, and deduct your immediate liabilities, but be consistent in terms of the policy that you adapt, really.
All right. If you've just joined us, we're speaking to Showkat Mukadam. He's one of the trustees at SANZAF, has been there for the last 40 years. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask with regards to Zakat, particularly those that are in the business field, then please call our studio line on 010-880-2396. Our WhatsApp line 061-766-0355. Now, Showkat, when it comes to business people, you've explained very, very clearly how they should calculate their stock and what they should subtract from the assets in terms of liabilities and so on. I just want to ask you with that question on one of the points you made with regards to people who owe you in your business. You said some people owe you over 30 days, some people owe you over 60 days, and at some point, that is still part of your wealth. At some point, you are going to get that money. Could you perhaps maybe just explain it again in terms of, because that's quite an important point there in terms of who owes you and how you calculate the zakat on the amounts owed to you in terms of when you're actually calculating your assets.
That's a very good question, Brother Luqman, to clarify that. I think the important point is, when somebody owes you money, you've rendered him a service or you've sold him some goods. All right. If you didn't sell the goods, you would have had the goods on which you would have paid zakah. So the goods change in nature to an amount owing by somebody to you, effectively. Right.
Okay.
And hence, you would have paid on the goods. Now you must pay on the amounts owing to you by your customers. For a doctor, by his patients, for example. Okay. So this extends to all the different kinds of businesses, really. Now, the question really becomes that often you have some people who struggle to pay you at the end of the day.
Right.
And the beauty about the principle of zakah is that it's not there to create hardship on you. In other words, you're not required to pay zakah on somebody who is unable to pay you for whatever personal reasons or business reason. He's got some difficulty and so on. Right? So the jurists say, pay your zakah on strong debtors, strong customers, in other words. So the question then is, you have to decide on a criteria what is strong. And I'm contending, don't change that criteria from year to year to suit you effectively. I'm saying make a principal decision that all those beyond 90 days or beyond 120 days are weak debtors. And therefore, exclude them from your total that you have as debtors, total amount owing to you. But be consistent with that principle, because inshallah, when that brother pays, it ends up to be money in the bank. And if it is that money is still there for a year, then you're going to pay zakah money again, effectively. So on. So the beauty of that is that it doesn't create hardship on you, because you haven't been paid by the customer that is in the 180-day category or can't pay you. You're not required to pay zakah on that. You're required to pay zakah on strong debtors, really.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Showkat, if somebody, is it possible for somebody for a business to pay zakat on behalf of an individual? I ask this because a lot of times our wealth is associated with the business that we actually working in, and when we pay our zakat, some sort of differentiation needs to be made, isn't it? Because the business must run as a going concern, but what's your personal wealth? Please explain that concept.
Yes, so again, Lukman, a very good question there. First of all, zakah is payable by individuals. The responsibility is on an individual, not on a company, not on a close corporation, not on a trust. It's the individual that takes responsibility for the zakah of those assets in those legal entities. Okay?
Right.
So we accept the fact that in South Africa, we have different forms of entities, and so every country has different form of operating entities through which they run their businesses, really. All you do is you pierce the veil, as we call it in legal terms. In other words, you look through the legal entity and you look for these assets and liabilities that I've just described, really. So if you've got a company and you've got a wholesale business, you look for your stock figure, you look for your debtors figure, you look for your bank figure, amount in the bank, and you take off your liabilities. It doesn't matter what the legal form is, because you, as an act of ibadah, are responsible to execute and comply with your requirements of settling your zakah. So if you're in a partnership, a very good example is a medical practice. Maybe there are two doctors who are in a partnership. All you do is you look at these figures that I've illustrated in the context of that business. And if you're a 50% partner, then you take 50% of that figures, or those figures at least, all right? And you attribute your zakah calculation on those amounts of 50% of those assets, really. Similarly, if it's a company that you have some shares in, that you're holding all your shares in and you're running your business, all you do is you go through the structure, you look through the structure, you look for these assets inside the company, and you calculate your zakah. Similarly, in the case of trust, many people have set up trusts again to grow their wealth and to save their taxes and estate duty and those kind of things, and to make succession planning very, very easy. Again, you, the planner, constructed the trust effectively, right? And the trust is always for the benefit of individual beneficiaries most of the time, in any case. So again, you look for these assets, and typically it will have investments and it will have money in the bank and so on. You look at the surplus wealth, you do your normal calculation, you decide on the particular date every year that you want to do the assessment, and you do the calculation on that basis. So to summarize, zakah is an individual act of ibadah. It's an individual responsibility. What structure you use does not come into play. Look at the principles as I've expounded for you.
Okay, so that's a very important point to make cognizance of the fact that it's a personal responsibility, and I think that's really important that you've made that point, Showkat. The next question is: if I own an empty plot, do I pay zakat on the value of the plot, or whatever sort of development that comes on the plot? Yeah, explain that concept,
Yeah.
please.
So again, as I said to you early on, you don't pay on the capital assets of a business effectively. So in the case of a person who's a private investor and he has a plot, he does not pay zakah on the plot value. He pays on anything that is money in the bank, amount owing to him by customers, and lastly on stock that he has. So if you have a plot and you've got it as an investment as an individual, you do not pay zakah on the plot really. However, if you a developer, in other words, you're building houses for profit, then the plot is stock for you. That's the important differentiation. Then the plot is stock for you. In that case, you're going to take that into account for the calculation of your zakah. So you'll take the value, the cost of the plot, in my example, take your debtors, if there are people that owe you money for whatever your houses you've sold and they're going to pay in due course, and there's money in the bank, then that plot is stock in your case. But a private individual that has a plot just for investment or another house for earning rental income, you don't pay on the rental income, you don't pay on the house, you pay on the money that's held as a balance on a particular date from the rental income, for example, in this case. Okay, it's very important that many people have a second property and a third property that you let out. The whole point of zakah is to encourage you to spend the money, not to hoard.
Right.
Okay,
Showkat,
that is why I emphasize that you pay your zakah on surplus wealth on hand on a particular date. So if you've collected rental on the property for the whole year and you've spent it, there's no zakah payable because there is no surplus money left over. If you've saved half of it and you have it on the date that you decide that you're going to calculate your zakah, then you pay on the surplus 50% that you are handing over. It's very important. It's only on the surplus wealth that you pay.
Showkat, while we're still talking about real estate and businesses that actually make money through real estate and property, we know that in South Africa, it's probably in something of a boom time right now for property developers and things like that. So you explained very nicely that if that plot of land is part of your stock, you will pay. It is zakatable wealth. How about people who are selling homes on behalf of people and they have, for example, 5 exclusive mandates? Um, does that form part of their stock, or only after they've sold the houses will they calculate how much money was made and therefore how much they are now zakatable or liable to pay zakat thereof?
So, Brother Lukman, in your example, you're referring to somebody who's got the mandate to sell the homes, not the owner of
Yes.
the homes. You're referring to the
No.
mandate. Call it
Yes.
very simply an estate agent, for example, right?
That's right.
Now,
So those are
again,
potential earnings. Yeah.
so we go back to the basic principle, right, that I started right at the beginning. And it's answered very simply by the test of ownership. Does the estate agent own the plot and the answer, or own the property? And the answer is no. It must be yours totally. You've got to have unfettered freedom to sell and dispose of the asset as you wish. However, if that estate agent is sitting with surplus money in his bank account, he will be liable to pay zakah on that effectively. If one of the people that he sold for owes him money, then that person will become a debtor. So in his case, his calculation will be, what's my bank balance? What's my debtors? Less, where am I supposed to pay immediate liabilities? I may have to pay VAT on that collection. I may have to pay taxes on it. You're allowed to claim those things immediately. You're allowed to claim those immediate liabilities from the assets, and you pay your 2.5%. Only 2.5%, Brother Lukman. It's not 97.5%. It's the opposite of exactly. And we really believe that, and we've done some desktop research and so on as to what we believe are zakah collectible potentially in South Africa. And as you know, the figures are becoming more easily to calculate and difficult in certain areas, simply because we've got so many sharia asset managers and sharia funds that report the figures to Pretoria. And hence we got a sense of what the total zakah, total sharia investments is with these sharia managers, sharia fund managers, effectively.
Right.
Now, when we did that calculation last, the figure on based on 2.5%, and let's assume everybody has the minimum nisab and it's freely available and all those kind of things. We believe that figure based on investments alone is somewhere between 750 million rand to 1 billion rand, right?
Subhanallah.
It's between 750 million rand and 1 billion rand. That's taking 2.5% on a desktop, adding up all the funds managed by the sharia compliant asset managers. Now, if we add to that those who are banking and investing with non-sharia compliant investment holders, effectively, that's the second point that you need to add. And thirdly, the one that's very difficult to formulate is the value of business assets that are zakatable, because there's no central database for us to record that. But we know that Muslim businesses are a number in the country. And we do believe that somewhere between 1 billion and 1.5 billion rand, if we add those other two categories, is easily supposed to be collectible every year and contributed. Now, obviously, I mean, SANZAF is one of its core functions is its transparency and corporate governance. And we collect every year and we report within 3 months of our financial year in. We collect about 150 million rand and we account for that to the public as such, really. So there are many other organizations, really. But our 150 million rand is far away from the 1.5 billion rand. I mean, we had about 10% effectively. So the point is, there is a lot of work, and alhamdulillah, our purpose in SANZAF is to create the advocacy of Zakah and the concept and explain the concept of Zakah and importance and why it's such an important role and an important act of ibadah to comply with, really. As you miss your salah, you used to catch up. If you haven't paid it correctly, as I've explained, you've got to catch it up. There's no other option for you, effectively from that point of view. So we are so pleased that this contribution of Zakah is increasing exponentially. And our focus has been much on the advocacy besides our programs that we run. But we believe, particularly in the Muslim business space, if they sit down and do the calculation, as I'm illustrating to you, they will realize that there is much more needed to be contributed by themselves. And quite frankly, we are available to consult with them. We assist them on a confidential basis. We offer that service to assist them effectively. But it's important, it's simple. Be consistent. Take the 5 principles that I've indicated. Define your policy. Whether you run the business through a practice, whether you run the business through a partnership, you take your portion of that interest and you pay your annual zakah. Inshallah, I think those beneficiaries will derive that benefit, and so you will derive the benefit of those beneficiaries deriving the benefit, inshallah.
Now, Showkat, you talked about the amount of zakat that the desktop calculation that you made, and the actual amount that is actually collected. Practically, there seems to be a dichotomy there. It's not the same amount. So does this then mean that the level of carrying out the zakah is not as great or as it should be in South Africa, or do you think it could be improved? The level of the actual payment of zakat.
No, I think it could be improved because, look, a lot of people pay. Don't get me wrong. A lot of business houses pay. The question is, are they paying correctly? That's the point. Are you with me? As we expounded now, you've got to pay on stock. You've got to pay on debtors. You've got to pay on money in the bank and take off your liabilities. You see, for too long, do we look at the bank balance and pay our zakah on the bank balance?
Right.
For too long.
Okay.
For an individual, it's very easy. You get a statement from your asset manager to say these are your investments, effectively, and this is your money in the bank, and you got minimal liabilities, immediate liabilities, not bonds or anything like that, and it's very easy to work. But having illustrated to you now, for a businessman, he has to sit down seriously and say, listen, what is my date? What is the practical figure that I have to look at effectively, right? And do a proper calculation every year. We do believe they pay. We think that having listened to this exercise, that many of them need to close that gap on the correct payment, inshallah.
Inshallah. Showkat, we just have one last question that's just come in here, and if you don't mind, if you could just answer it very quickly, and then we'll forward any other questions that came through offline to you. Here's the question here. If somebody resigned from the employment and the provident fund got transferred into a preservation fund, but it's not in your possession, does one pay zakat on any of those?
Yeah, so I will be covering this topic next week, inshallah. We will be having another session on investments and retirement funds and so on. So the principle is the following. The principle is that the provident fund, the balance on hand in your provident fund, you don't require to pay zakah on, because that was the condition of employment. You did not voluntarily and willingly make that investment. In other words, you come to employment and they say it's a condition, you got to belong to our provident fund. Okay? Until you have unfettered ownership of those funds, you're not required to pay zakah. Now, what this brother is trying to say in this case is that he's retired or he's resigned and he's got his provident fund. He has a choice now what to do with the money. And he has chosen to put the funds into a preservation fund for various tax reasons and those kind of benefits. But that decision he has made voluntary, and hence he has to pay zakah on the amount in the preservation fund, effectively.
I see.
Obviously, the rule normally is, I said to you, the funds must be with you for a whole year, effectively. And if they're not there with you for a whole year, you can delay the zakah until that 1 year has expired, really. Okay, remember the 4 conditions. You've got to have bigger than nisab, larger than nisab. You've got to have total ownership. 3, it must be with you for a year, and it must lend itself to growth. So the answer is, because he has made that decision voluntary, and because it's a preservation fund which you have chosen voluntarily to do it, because he could have kept it in his savings account also. And if it was in his savings account or in his bank account, he would have paid 2.5%. He does not pay on the provident fund because that's imposed on him, and there are various conditions attached to the provident fund. In the case of the preservation fund, there are also conditions, but you knowingly did that knowing the conditions, really.
All right, Showkat, thank you so much for your time, and I know that SANZAF regularly holds zakat webinars and seminars. You have been holding some during the month of Ramadan. I think a few more are going to be held before the month ends. You want to just tell us about those webinars and seminars?
Yes. So Zakah and Khamla has throughout the whole month been running these webinars and seminars throughout the country. As I said, it's a core focus of ours, that we need to promote the advocacy of zakah and the principles of zakah. So inshallah, this Saturday, there is another webinar, and they're welcome to visit our website to get the details. There are different scholars covering different topics. In the past weekend, I know the National Chairperson, Fairuz Muhammad, and Yasmina had a women's group in Cape Town, and various other areas in the country, webinars and seminars have been taking place. If anybody wants us to do an individual webinar for them, an individual Zoom shoot, we're welcome. Contact our office. We're only glad to clear up, and they're welcome to contact any of us throughout the country. This is what we're here for. This is the month that you must get your reward of making a contribution. Multiply it, brothers.
Ameen. Showkat Mukadam, thank you very much for your time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was Showkat Mukadam, trustee at SANZAF for the last 40 years, and an expert when it comes to the disbursement of zakat. As he says, advocacy when it comes to the payment of zakat. That's what the work they do. That's the work they do. And of course, some of those figures that he spoke about really mind-boggling. And of course, the absolute ability of zakat funds to completely eradicate poverty. That's something that we should always think about as Muslims. And inshallah Aziz, the more we pay our zakat, and the more people are actually coming forward to pay their zakat and finding out more about how they pay their zakat, inshallah, the more people will be the recipients. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back, inshallah. It's 23 minutes to 5. Stay tuned.